Welcome to the 17th lesson in our Citizens Constitutional Advocacy Council CCAC 1.0 training series. This is CCAC Lesson 1.17 in our series. This lesson is meant to focus on some answers to the question of why we need to organize our caucuses. What is the problem that our CCAC organization will correct? Why is this strategy vital to the future of our country and the assurance of our self-preservation as individuals, communities, and as a nation? How do caucuses provide us with a solution, a remedy to the threats we see happening in our nation today? As we mentioned in prior lessons, our polity, the way that the people are organized politically, was changed by people in the highest levels of government in the early 1900s. They made this change so that the protections of the U.S. Constitution would not be available to common Americans to protect our country any longer from the things that these evil men wanted to accomplish. More will be shared about these reprehensible actions after you become a member of CCAC 2.0 by signing up as a free member of your state CCAC chapter. We will show you how to qualify to do that in the final lessons. One of the ways that these malicious political actors worked to conspire against our country was by changing our educational laws to move us as a people away from the ideas we need to know, which made us a free society, to one in which we may have no power anymore as Americans. For example, there was an organization created in the early 1770s that was a key part of the solution to the problems of government control that the colonists were fighting in the day of the imposition of government oppression by the British against the colonies. It was called the Continental Association. Have you ever heard of it? If you have, you are an exception to the rule. Most Americans, even men and women in their 60s and 70s, have never heard of the association and the important role it played in the very origins of the United States of America. Here's how Abraham Lincoln explained it in his argument for the continued perpetuity of the Union in 1861. In his paragraph 17 of his first inaugural address, it is an incredible analysis with respect to what most Americans today have never been clearly taught. Quote, descending from these general principles, we find the proposition that in legal contemplation, the Union is perpetual, confirmed by the history of the Union itself. The Union is much older than the Constitution. It was formed, in fact, by the Articles of Association in 1774. It was matured and continued by the Declaration of Independence in 1776. It was further matured, and the faith of all the then 13 states expressly plighted and engaged that it should be perpetual by the Articles of Confederation in 1778. And finally, in 1787, one of the declared objects for ordaining and establishing the Constitution was, quote, to form a more perfect union, end quote, and that's the end of the quotation. Lincoln pointed to legal contemplation. That is profound. Even though we are using his statements to prove a different point from what he was arguing in his day, Lincoln's words validate our argument, just as he used them to make his own. He said origin of the Union was, quote, confirmed by the history of the Union itself. Lincoln then claimed that the United States was formed, in fact, by the Articles of Association in 1774, not by the Declaration of Independence in 1776. The association was the equivalent of what we are now forming with CCAC. The claim was, according to President Lincoln, confirmed by the history, that the Union was formed, in fact, by these Articles of Association 2 years before the Declaration of Independence. And yet we know nothing about the Continental Association and the incredible importance of that organization in providing the wherewithal of the people of the colonies to organize themselves to withstand the invasions of Great Britain and the necessities of political organization that was needed in that day. Today, there is a glaring gap in our history books. For example, when did you ever hear that in 1775, there were 7,000 delegates elected in 12 of the 13 colonies to form committees of political importance throughout the communities of that time? If you learned this, you certainly were privileged to be a blatant exception again. In the population of 2.3 million in 1776, it is easy to see that if this country was founded today and we had equivalent representatives through a new association, we would have 100 times the population, or nearly 700,000 representatives of the people as delegates or deputies organized in the states to legislate on our behalf, and then to elect the delegates to seat at the First General Congress of America, also known as the First Continental Congress. Those numbers are staggering. How different would America look today if there were over 14,000 state representatives of the people in each state working side by side on average, cooperating with the people in every community in America. This is the equivalent of what they had in 1775. We're not necessarily suggesting that we must do exactly likewise today, though there are actually some who do, and do it proportionally to what was in place just before the Revolutionary War broke out in 1775. But that is what we had back then, the equivalent of 700,000 representatives. It is no wonder that the people of the colonies were so prepared to fight the greatest government and army in the world and were able to prevail. We need to learn from our history, so in this case, we can repeat it. But as another observation, does anyone else notice the glaring hole in our educational experience in modern times? Why is it that it appears that we have never been taught how these representatives of the United States of America in Congress, General Congress assembled, were even elected and appointed to those positions? How many people actually have heard of and had a clear knowledge and understanding of what the Continental Association was, how it was formed, what it historically accomplished, and that it was formed, in fact, according to Lincoln, as the first step in the process of the original government of the United States of America? Do you actually know how the delegates were elected to the First Continental Congress? They were not elected by their colonial legislatures because these legislative bodies were generally forbidden to meet by the colonial governors under order of the king. That was one of the complaints in the Declaration of Independence. Remember that? The CCAC organization's purpose is to revitalize the Constitution. The history of the United States starts with the fact that the association was the starting point, according to an American president. The incipient Articles of Association of 1774 document was where it began. And if that is so, we certainly would want to know what that association was and what it did then and over the subsequent years to see whether it has any usefulness to us today. This completes the 17th lesson entitled CCAC 1.17. Thank you for listening to the 17th segment as part of our CCAC 1.0 series in our national orientation. Please join us for the next lesson in this series as we continue to unfold the Citizens Constitutional Advocacy Council story. This is the extraordinary process in which CCAC will successfully provide continuity of government of, by, and for the people. In our next lesson, CCAC 1.18, we will go on to explain further details of how we implement our Citizens Constitutional Advocacy Council. If you realize the necessity of revitalizing constitutional polity at the state and local level, please join this cause by going to www.ccac-us.com and registering on our official website. Take Pre-Quiz 1.0. We then urge you to work through the entire CCAC 1.0 series to understand the continuity of essential information we provide to help us all be on the same page. Then, upon passing the post-quiz with a perfect score, you will be directed on how to take the next step in the process of becoming a member of this vital organization. Please don't shortchange this process. Listen to and study the CCAC 1.0 material carefully. If you have questions or concerns about what you are learning so far or issues affecting your community, please refer to the links connected to this lesson or contact the person who gave you this information. We extend our best wishes from the Citizens Constitutional Advocacy Council.